The sun hung low and heavy over the prairie, pouring gold light over the land like molasses over hot cornbread. Heat shimmered above the tall grass, and the scent of dust and wild sage danced on the wind. It was the kind of summer that pressed on your chest, made the sweat roll easy, and the thoughts come slow. Jonah Redd was a man out of time. His boots were worn near through, his hat stained with the ghosts of 100 trails, and his heart heavier than the saddlebags slung over his mule. He'd been walking near 3 days out of Dodge, following no road but the one his guilt carved out before him. He'd once been a soldier, then a lawman, then a hired gun, but now he was just a drifter. The last town he passed through, Ashwood, had a burned-out chapel, a crooked saloon, and eyes that followed a man too long. He left without speaking a word. Some roads lead to salvation. Others just loop back to the same sorrow. By sundown, he found himself standing on the edge of the Lakota lands, where the sky stretched so wide it made a man feel small enough to disappear. His canteen was dry, and his mule had started throwing looks that said, "I ain't going much farther." He didn't blame her. As the shadows lengthened, a groan of thunder rolled from the east, not from the sky, but from deep within his gut. He hadn't eaten proper in 2 days. Just jerky, chewing tobacco, and regret. He looked around, figuring where to bed down, when he saw a column of smoke slipping skyward about a half-mile north. Now, a man who's been on the run as long as Jonah knows better than to walk toward smoke. Smoke means fire, and fire draws folks, and folks ain't always friendly. But something in him stirred. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was the mule's stubborn look. Or maybe it was fate, whispering soft as a prairie breeze. Go on now. So he followed it. The land dipped into a small valley, ringed with cottonwoods and willows, and there, nestled in the green, was a camp. Not a settler's camp, no. This was older, wiser. Teepees stood in a crescent, their hides painted with symbols Jonah didn't dare read. A small stream cut through the heart of the camp, glittering like silver. And beside it knelt a woman. She wore buckskin and bone, her long black braid catching the last light of day. Her hands were moving over a pile of herbs, sorting them with care. She hadn't seen him yet, or maybe she had, and didn't care to flinch. Jonah cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dry as creek gravel. "I ain't looking for trouble. Just water. Maybe a patch of shade to rest." She looked up slow, her dark eyes steady. There wasn't fear in em, nor anger, just something older. Something that looked clean through him. "You carry sickness in your chest," she said, voice calm as still water. "Not fever, not cough. A sickness of the soul." Jonah blinked. "Beg pardon." "You are heavy with sorrow. You seek something, but you run from it too." He didn't know what to say to that. No one had read him that quick in a long time, maybe ever. He looked down at his boots, embarrassed by how dirty they were. She rose and stepped aside. "Drink," she said, gesturing to the stream. "Rest." He did, thanking her with a nod. The water was cold, sweeter than any whiskey. When he looked back up, she was watching him again. "My name is Akecheta," she said. "My mother was Lakota. My father was medicine. I am both." Jonah leaned back on his elbows, heart beating slower than it had all day. "Jonah," he said. "Just Jonah." They sat in silence as the crickets tuned up their night song. He didn't ask if he could stay, and she didn't say he couldn't. But as the stars blinked into the velvet sky, and the heat of the day gave way to the hush of night, Jonah had a feeling he'd crossed into a chapter of his life he wasn't writing alone no more. That first night, Jonah lay near the stream, with only his saddlebag for a pillow and the sky for a blanket. The air was thick with the scent of sweetgrass and wood smoke, and the sound of frogs croaking in the reeds kept time like a lullaby. Akecheta didn't offer much in the way of talk, but she'd set a small fire and placed a chunk of cornmeal bread beside it without a word. He'd eaten it like a starving dog, half ashamed but grateful all the same. She stayed quiet, sitting cross-legged near the fire, her hands busy with a bundle of herbs, crushing, mixing, whispering words into the smoke. Jonah watched her from the corner of his eye, marveling at how she moved like she was part of the land itself, still and strong and full of quiet power. "Why you helping me?" he asked, not unkindly. Her hands didn't stop. Because someone helped me once. And because your spirit is frayed. Like an old shirt pulled too many ways. Jonah snorted. Ain't the first time I've been called worn. She didn't laugh, but the corner of her mouth twitched. It was the closest he'd seen her come to smiling. He shifted, the firelight dancing off his face. I've done things, he said, staring into the flames. Things I ain't proud of. Wore a badge once. Lost in a bottle. Took coin for violence. Got blood on my hands that won't ever wash clean. Akecheta didn't look at him. She dropped another herb into the fire, and it hissed, sending up a blue-tinged smoke. Your hands ain't what's dirty, she said. It's your heart you need to cleanse. Jonah blinked. He wasn't used to being red like a journal left open in the wind. She rose then, graceful as a deer, and stepped toward the stream. Tomorrow, I will take you to the old stones. There is healing there, if you're willing to face it. Jonah didn't ask what the stones were. He didn't ask if they'd fix what was broken in him. He just nodded slow, feeling the kind of weight lift off his shoulders that hadn't budged in years. That night, he dreamed. He saw fire, whole towns burning, a man screaming, a woman crying in the dirt, her hands stained red. And through it all, he stood still, unable to move, just watching as everything he loved turned to ash. He woke before dawn, breath ragged, shirt damp with sweat. Akecheta was already awake, turned into a small pouch at her side. She glanced at him once, then handed him a canteen. Dreams are teachers, she said, but they don't always speak plain. He drank, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Ain't nothing plain about my past. No, she said, but your future's still yours. They set out at sunrise, the prairie hushing beneath their feet. Her bare soles barely disturbed the earth. His boots left deeper prints, like he was still fighting the weight of what he carried. They passed wildflowers growing in bunches, yellows and purples, and sky-blue blooms, pushing up from dry soil like defiance. Hawks circled high above, and the sun warmed the land into awaken. By midday, they reached the stones. They stood in a wide circle atop a hill, old and weather-worn, smoothed by wind and time. Some were tall as men, others flat and low. Akecheta stepped into the ring like entering a sacred place, and maybe it was. She motioned for him to sit. These stones remember, she said. They hold the pain of the land, the joys, the truths. Jonah settled in uneasy. What do I do? Nothing. Let them speak. The wind picked up, whispering through the grass. He closed his eyes. And what he felt was not words, but weight. His ma's voice humming, low when he was small. The clatter of spurs on wood. The first time he killed a man. The last time he saw his brother alive. All of it there. All of it real. When he opened his eyes, his cheeks were wet. Akecheta said nothing. She just sat beside him and laid a hand on his arm, warm and steady. You are not your past, she whispered. And for the first time in years, he believed it. For 3 days and 3 nights, Jonah stayed in the valley with Akecheta. Time moved different there, slower, like the land itself was taking long breaths and exhaling peace. He helped gather wood, fetched water from the stream, and even learned the name of a few herbs she crushed into her medicine pouch. But always, the past followed him, quiet as a shadow. One evening, just as the sun was bleeding red into the hills, a sound split the air, the distant whinny of a horse, fast and close. Akecheta's head lifted sharp. She listened, eyes narrowing. Jonah reached for the rifle he'd laid against a tree earlier, instincts rising, like dust before a storm. You expecting company? No, she said flat. They stepped toward the edge of camp just as the rider crested the ridge. Young, lean, and Lakota. The boy looked barely old enough to shave, but the worry in his eyes aged him 10 years. He pulled up fast, dismounted even faster. Akecheta, he panted. Your uncle sent me. There's sickness, bad sickness, in the southern village. Folks say it started with the water. We don't have enough medicine. She didn't hesitate. Tell them I'm coming. At sunrise. The boy nodded and turned back toward his horse, but not before throwing a glance at Jonah. Suspicion flickered in his gaze, but he said nothing. After he rode off, Jonah turned to her. You going to help them? She nodded, already gathering supplies. You going alone? She paused. I always have. Well, Jonah said, tightening the strap on his saddlebag. You don't have to this time. She looked at him, long and steady. It won't be safe. And it won't be simple. Neither am I, he replied. The next morning, they set off together. The land between the valley and the southern village was rough, dotted with thorn brush and dry gullies. The summer sun beat down hard, and the air was thick with the smell of dust and far-off fire. They camped just outside the village by the third night, under a sky heavy with stars. The closer they got, the more solemn Akecheta became. She moved with purpose, her hands already sorting bundles of willow bark and dried root. Jonah sat across from her, cleaning his rifle by habit. You've done this before, he said, not a skin, just knowing. She nodded. I learned from my mother, and her mother before her. Medicine runs deep in my blood. He nodded slow. Never figured I'd end up riding beside a healer. She met his gaze. And I never figured I'd meet a gunman with a wounded soul and a gentle heart. That quieted him. That night, as the fire died low, he told her about his brother Nathan, about how the boy had followed him into a fight he'd tried to walk away from, about the bullet meant for Jonah that found Nathan instead. He spoke low, like the words themselves hurt. I was trying to be a better man, he whispered, but I got him killed. Akecheta didn't try to fix it. She didn't speak of fate or forgiveness. She just moved to his side and laid a hand over his heart. The dead don't ask us to suffer, she said, only to remember. He closed his eyes. The pain was still there, but didn't feel so alone anymore. Next morning, the village came into view, a scattering of lodges and low houses, half the fires cold. The air hung heavy with sickness, the scent of wet earth and fever. Akecheta wasted no time. She moved from one shelter to the next, leaving behind poultices, boiled herbs, and soft words. Jonah stayed close, hauling water, lending strength where hers flagged. That night, one of the elders called him over. You ride with a woman who carries many burdens, the old man said, but she walks lighter with you near. Jonah tipped his hat. She's carried me more than I've carried her. You have a choice, the elder said. Stay and become part of the circle, or go and keep walking alone. Jonah didn't answer, not yet, but as he watched Akecheta move through the village, comforting a crying child, lifting a cool cloth to a fevered brow, he felt something shift inside him, like a lock tumbling open, like roots finally reaching deep enough to hold. The sickness lingered like a ghost, slow to arrive, slower still to leave. Fever took hold of the village like a hand round the throat, and every day Akecheta moved with tireless grace, like she was holding back the tide with her bare hands. Jonah had never seen anything like it. She slept little, ate less, always tending to the old, the weak, the ones whose breath came shallow and thin. And though she rarely showed it, the strain was starting to show in her eyes, the kind of tired that runs deeper than bone. Jonah did what he could. He boiled water, cleaned wounds, held hands when folks passed, though he wasn't used to such things. Akecheta didn't ask much, but she always met his gaze with quiet thanks. One night, after they'd laid another child to rest near the riverbank, Jonah found her sitting by the fire, shoulders sagged in. The stars were hidden behind thick clouds, and the wind had turned cool, like the land itself was mourning. You ever feel like you're trying to empty the sea with a cup? He asked. She looked up, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Every day. He sat beside her, close enough to feel her warmth. Why do you keep doing it? She hesitated. Because if I don't, who will? There was a silence then, heavy and full. The fire cracked. A lone coyote howled out in the hills. I watched my mother die when I was 15, she said, voice low. Smallpox. We couldn't save her. Couldn't even bury her near the others. They burned her lodge. Said it was safer. Jonah didn't speak. Just listened, every word burning into his chest like brands on cattle hide. My father was gone before that, killed near Fort Kearney. Said he was mistaken for a scout. Jonah cursed under his breath. You've lost more than most. Her gaze didn't waver. Loss is a teacher, but it don't have to be the last one. Then she turned toward him, and for the first time, he saw her not just as a healer, but as a woman shaped by storms, one who'd stood against the wind and stayed upright. "You stayin'?" she asked, quiet but firm. He looked away, heart pounding. "Don't know where else I'd go." That ain't an answer. He chewed his lip, fingers tight on his knees. "I've been running a long time. From lawmen. From ghosts. From myself." She reached out and took his hand, rough and calloused as it was, and held it gently. "Then maybe it's time to stop." That night, he stayed in her lodge. He didn't touch her. Didn't try. Just lay beside her, their breaths matched in, like old songs. The world outside was still full of sickness and sorrow, but inside, there was warmth. There was peace. And in the early hush of dawn, she stirred and whispered, "You ain't just passing through, Jonah Redd. Not anymore." He didn't reply. He just reached for her hand and held it like it was the only thing tethering him to the earth. Summer crept into August, and with it came a strange quiet, a stillness that settled over the village like dust on a saddle. The sickness had eased, thanks to Akecheta's medicine and Jonah's steady hands. Folks were breathing easier, and children's laughter began to echo once more between the lodges and trees. Jonah found himself fixing things, mending fences, repairing roof hides, teaching the boys how to hold a knife without cutting themselves and how to shoot straight. "Only for hunting," he'd say, not for pride. And though he didn't say it aloud, he started to feel something. Not joy, not exactly, but stillness. Like maybe he'd found a place he didn't have to leave. That peace cracked one night, like a dry branch under boot. It was just past dusk. The sky a deep bruised purple, fireflies blinking in the tall grass. Jonah was sitting outside Akecheta's lodge, cleaning a broken rifle, when a scout rode in hard from the north. His face was lined with dust and fear. "They're coming," he gasped, swinging down from his pony. Riders. White men. Maybe a dozen. Saw the smoke. Followed it. Jonah stood fast, rifle already forgotten. Akecheta appeared at his side, calm but alert. "Do you know them?" He shook his head. "But I know the type. Men like that don't ride this far for trade." She turned to the scout. "How long do we have?" 2 hours, maybe less." The village stirred to life, quick and quiet. Fires were doused. Children gathered. The old and weak were moved toward the trees to the east. Jonah paced like a penned stallion. "They're looking for me," he muttered, mostly to himself. "Maybe. Maybe not." Akecheta stepped close. "It doesn't matter. They ride toward us. That's reason enough to stand." He looked at her, his jaw tight. "I can lead them away." "No," she said firm. "We don't run. Not from men like that." He studied her face in the dim light. So fierce, and still so kind. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from the storm coming. But he knew better than to think she needed shielding. When the riders crested the ridge, the moon caught the shine of their guns. Jonah counted 13. Dirty coats, white hats, hard faces. Their leader rode in front, tall in the saddle, his mustache thick and curled, a silver revolver handgun heavy on his hip. "Jonah Redd," he called out across the open ground, voice carrying like thunder. "Heard you were hiding out here. Thought we'd come say hello." Jonah stepped forward, rifle in hand. "Hello, Garth." The man grinned. "You run real far after Kansas City. Took my brother with you, too. Bullet to the neck, wasn't it?" "He pulled first," Jonah said. "You know that." Garth's eyes glinted. "Don't matter none now." Around them, the villagers were still, watching from the shadows. Akecheta stood to Jonah's left, unarmed but unshaken. "This here's Lakota land," Jonah said. "Ain't yours to ride through." "That's so." Garth smirked. "Then maybe the Lakota ought to choose who they keep company with. You walk out now. We'll leave the rest in peace." Jonah glanced at Akecheta. She gave no sign, but her silence said everything. He turned back. "I ain't walking nowhere." For a beat, the night held its breath. Then gunfire cracked. Jonah dove, rifle barking. Akecheta pulled a boy from the path of a bullet. Villagers fired from cover. Arrows whistled through the night. It was chaos, smoke, blood, hoofbeats. Jonah moved like a man possessed, protecting, defending, dropping riders with grim precision. Garth fought back vicious, killing one of the village guards with a gut shot. By the time it was done, the dust hung thick and bitter. 8 riders lay dead. The rest fled into the dark, tails tucked. Jonah found Garth wounded, crawling toward his revolver. Jonah stepped on his wrist. "This ends here," he growled. Garth sneered up at him. "You think this little village makes you clean? You'll never be clean." Jonah stared down at him, then turned, walking away. Let the ghosts bury their own. The morning after the gunfire, the village was quiet, but not broken. Smoke curled up from cooking fires again. Children peeked from behind tents, with eyes wide, curious. Life, cautious and slow, began to unfurl once more like leaves after frost. Jonah stood at the edge of the battlefield, hat in hand, staring down at the place where Garth had bled into the dirt. They'd buried the dead, riders and villagers alike, with stone markers and words whispered to the wind. Akecheta found him there. She didn't speak right off, just stood beside him, her shawl catching the breeze like a flag of peace. When she did speak, it was quiet. "You stayed." He glanced sideways. "Didn't feel like running no more." "You could have died." "I didn't." She nodded. "No, you didn't." They walked back through the village together, passing faces that now looked at Jonah different. Not as an outsider, not as a drifter, but as a man who'd stood with them when the sky turned black. A young boy ran up, grinning ear to ear. "Jonah, will you show me again how to tie that trap?" Jonah crouched down. "Soon, little buckaroo. Soon as I catch my breath." That evening, they gathered for a feast, not just to honor the dead, but to celebrate the living. The old ones sang. Drums beat like thunder over the prairie. Women stirred stew thick with wild roots and herbs, and laughter rang like wind chimes through the dusk. Jonah ate beside Akecheta, his back leaning against a tall stone. He watched the way her face glowed in the firelight, how she laughed with the children, her voice like wind through cottonwoods. He reached over, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "You ever think," he said, "that fate don't just push us? Maybe it pulls us too." She looked at him, slow and sure. "I think fate brought you here, but you're the one who stayed." That night, as the stars opened up over the plains like a spill of silver dust, Jonah kissed her for the first time. It wasn't wild. It wasn't rushed. It was a thing old and sacred, like the land itself had been waiting. And in that kiss was every mile he'd walked alone, every ache he'd carried, every piece of him that had gone missing since the war, since the bottle, since the badge. It was home. Days passed, then weeks. The sun dipped lower each evening, painting the prairie in firelight and gold. Jonah never said the words, not out loud, but he didn't need to. He stayed. That said more than any vow. He took up the kind of work that don't sound like much in a story, repairing broken fence posts, digging new irrigation lines, helping the old ones fix their roofs. But to the people of the village, it meant something. It meant he was more than just another man passing through. And every evening, after the day's work was done, he'd sit beside Akecheta beneath the cottonwood by the stream. She'd hum songs she learned from her mother, and he'd carve little animals from scrap wood for the children. One night he handed her a tiny bear, notched with care. "It's strong," he said. "So are you," she answered. But not all storms ride on horseback. One hot afternoon, 2 U.S. Marshals came riding through, dusty coats, badges pinned to their vests, and expressions like they'd been chewing cactus. They didn't dismount. "You Jonah Redd?" the lead one asked, voice sharp. Jonah stepped forward slow, hands relaxed but ready. "Depends. We got a warrant. Kansas Territory. Said you're wanted for killing a man named Thomas Garth." Jonah sighed. "He was riding with a gang. Attacked this village. I didn't kill him out of vengeance. I killed him to stop more dying." "Still a death," the second marshal muttered. "You'll need to come with us. Let the court sort it." The village gathered close behind Jonah. He could feel their eyes on him. And Akecheta. She stepped beside him, her voice calm but firm. "This man saved lives. He defended our land when no one else would. The marshals looked uneasy. Truth was, they weren't bad men, just carrying orders. But law's got a way of overlooking justice when it suits its own purpose. Jonah turned to her. I'll go. No, she whispered fierce. He touched her hand. I can't build something honest if I'm still running from shadows. So he went. They bound his hands, tied him to a saddle, and rode out. But as he looked back over his shoulder, he saw her standing tall, not crying, not begging, just watching, like she knew this wasn't the end. It wasn't. 3 days later, in a dusty courthouse in Hays City, Jonah stood before a judge. The evidence was clear. The marshal even said, that village would be ash if he hadn't stood his ground. And when the judge asked if Jonah had anything to say, he tipped his hat and said, I've been running from who I was. I ain't proud of all I've done, but I'm trying to do right. The judge, an old rancher himself, narrowed his eyes and leaned back. You ain't the only man who had to fight to become decent, he muttered. Then he banged the gavel. Case dismissed. Jonah rode back that same week, free and clear, and when he came over that hill, saw Akecheta standing by the stream, arms crossed, eyes bright with relief. Well, it was like coming home after a war. Jonah's return was quiet, just the sound of hooves and the soft rustle of wind through prairie grass. No parade, no fanfare. Just him, his mule, and the kind of silence that meant something was waiting. When he reached the village, the first to see him was a little girl with 2 braids and a smile that could melt snow. You came back, she cried. He tipped his hat. Didn't plan on staying gone long. Then he saw her. Akecheta stood beneath the cottonwood, arms folded, that slow, proud look in her eyes. She didn't run. She didn't speak. She just walked up, placed her palm against his cheek, and nodded once. That was enough. They didn't rush into nothing. They'd both lived lives where nothing came easy. But over the next weeks, they built something truer than words. Jonah carved a new shelter, small but strong, with his own hands. Akecheta filled it with herbs, dried flowers, and the scent of something soft and good. He'd wake before dawn and ride out to help nearby homesteads, trade in labor for supplies. Come sundown, he'd return to the scent of stew cooking, Akecheta humming, and a fire that felt like peace. One day, while mending a broken wheel for a settler family, Jonah found a bundle of old letters, his brother Nathan's, from before the war. He'd thought him lost, but there they were, bundled in oilskin, forgotten in an old saddlebags he'd left behind when he fled Kansas. That night by the fire, he read them aloud. In one, Nathan wrote, If you ever find a place to rest, Jonah, stay. Don't run from what might heal you. Jonah sat quiet after that. Akecheta watched the flames dance, her hand wrapped in his. I ain't got much, he said at last, but I got 2 good hands, an honest heart, and what's left of my life. I reckon I'd be proud to spend the rest of it beside you. Akecheta didn't answer right away. She just leaned over, kissed his forehead, and said, Then stay, and we'll grow it together. The next morning, they marked the land with stones, shaped like a circle, a sign of life without end. They didn't marry in a church. No preacher said vows, but the village gathered under the open sky, the sun burning gold overhead. Songs were sung, bread was shared, and Jonah, wearing a freshly stitched shirt and a smile bigger than the prairie, took Akecheta's hand in both of his. I'm yours, he said, all the way through. By mid-September, the earth had gone thirsty. The sun hung heavy, the river shrank back, and the crops wilted like old soldiers leaning on their rifles. Even the wind sounded tired, rustling, the dry leaves like bones in a rattle. But life in the village pushed on. Jonah and Akecheta had taken to mending tools and planting what they could, stretching every drop of water like a thread. Hope was a brittle thing in dry land, but they held it between them, quiet and sacred. Then came the smoke. At first, just a wisp. Then more. On the 3rd day, they spotted flames flickering on the horizon, grass fire, likely sparked by dry lightning and stoked by wind. Jonah stood on a bluff, jaw tight, scouting the line of fire eating toward them. Akecheta joined him, eyes sharp. It'll reach us by morning. He nodded. We need a line dug, buckets filled, and prayers sent. They rallied the village, young, old, all in between. Buckets, blankets, shovels. They dug fire breaks with bare hands, soaked the edge of the grass. Jonah ran himself near to collapse. Akecheta moved like fire herself, fast, tireless, everywhere. But come dusk, the wind changed, howling east, bringing the fire faster. Jonah stood at the line, eye stinging, shirt soaked with sweat and smoke. He saw the flames crest a ridge, red and hungry, and felt that old fear clutch at his chest. Not fear for himself, fear of losing her. He turned to Akecheta. We ain't got enough. It's coming too fast. She looked at the fire, then the sky, then him. We've done all we can. Now we wait. So they waited, and prayed. And just when the fire reached the edge of the last break, when it licked at the first branch of the first tree near their lodges, it rained. Not a drizzle, a downpour. Thick drops, fat as silver coins, crashing to the earth like a shout from the heavens. The fire hissed, twisted, and gave up. The village cried out, not in fear but relief. Children danced. The elders wept. Jonah laughed, a deep, wild, grateful laugh that shook loose the last bit of fear clinging to him. He turned to Akecheta, soaked through, hair plastered to her cheeks. She smiled. Told you the earth would answer. He kissed her then, right there in the rain, with smoke rising from the wet ground and thunder rolling soft in the distance. That night, the village didn't sleep. They sang. They drummed. They gave thanks. And Jonah Redd, who once thought he'd die alone in a ditch outside Dodge, sat beside a fire, Akecheta's hand in his, and realized he had roots. Real roots. The kind storms couldn't rip loose. A year passed, quiet as a whisper on the wind. Seasons rolled over the prairie in soft waves, green to gold, warm to cool, sun to frost. But the land healed, and so did the hearts upon it. Jonah and Akecheta's home grew in quiet ways. A second lodge was raised beside the first, half stone, half wood, strong against wind and rain. A garden flourished behind it, full of corn, squash, and sunflowers that reached toward the sky like they were stretching for heaven itself. And in the spring, Akecheta placed Jonah's hand over her belly and smiled. He didn't speak, just held her close, his cheek to hers, heart thumping, like a drum at sundown. That child was born in July, just as the cottonwoods shook loose their fluff like snow. They named her Wiaka, Feather. She had her mother's eyes and her father's hands. And when she cried, it sounded like a song. Jonah built her a cradle board with his own hands, carvings of deer and eagles along the edge. Akecheta lined it with soft fur and whispered Lakota lullabies. Life was good. Not easy. Never easy. But good. One day, Jonah sat outside under the same old cottonwood, Wiaka bundled in his arms, while Akecheta gathered herbs by the stream. The wind stirred the leaves, and the sun warmed his face. He thought back to the towns, the trails, the gunfights and ghosts. The places he'd slept with one eye open, the names he didn't care to remember. He thought of the blood, the hurt, the running. And then he looked at her, his daughter, small and perfect, and realized he wasn't running no more. Akecheta came to him, knelt beside him, and leaned her head against his shoulder. You've changed, she said. He nodded slow. Maybe. Or maybe I just finally found a place I wanted to become better for. She smiled, her fingers lacing with his. You've become the man I saw in you the day we met, under that sky, on the edge of the wild. I didn't think I deserved this, he whispered. You didn't have to, she replied. You just had to stay. And so he did. And the wind, long and low through the grass, carried the sound of their laughter out across the land, where the ghosts had gone quiet. The earth had healed, and love, true and steady, had finally laid its roots.